Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to No Food Live. I'm your host, Courtney Riggle, joined by my co-host, Matthew Lang. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 2 of the No Food series. And today is KnowFOOD-FARM STAX, here to discuss open and reusable digital tools for food production. And how about that? We're in our Episode 2 second season, and it's almost Thanksgiving, one of my favorite food days. For those who are new to our series, No Food is here to dive deep into the world of food informatics and the Internet of Food. We interview scientists, thought leaders, and innovators to foster collaboration and advance global food digitization and democratization efforts. No Food Live airs the third Thursday every month, but you don't have to remember that. You'll never miss an episode if you click down below and subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Hi, everyone. We're so pleased to have you join us on No Food Live today, or whatever day you may end up watching this, since our previous episodes are all available for streaming in case you've missed the live broadcast. We thank you so much for tuning in. Your feedback continues to make our shows better, so we want to hear from you. And if you want to communicate with us, you can reach us at nofood@icfoods.org. Or you could just click the link in the video description.
Hey, dude, weren't you going to give us the infomercial opening?
Oh, yeah. Okay, let's see. Okay, here it goes. Are you tired of the main business models of food being a black box? I know I am. Are you tired of food companies, whether they're growing seeds or processing your food, always hiding the details? I know I am. Seriously, does it always have to be that way? Is that the only way food companies can make money? Is that the only way we can grow and process food and make money at it is by hiding the details? Or can we have business models based on traceable transparency and trust? So joining us today are three individuals actually who are making that happen. From soil sensors to farm operating systems to marketplaces of farms. What does that look like? I can't wait to find out and hear from our guests.
Our voyage today with Greg AgStack, co-founder of ourside.net. Among other things, they make an open source soil sensors and reflectometers capable of telling us things about how our food is grown and processed and kind of the states of the food. And they do a lot of implementation of these new technologies on the ground.
Second up today, we'll have Wolfneck Center's Research Director, Dr. Dorn Cox. Dorn is the founder of FarmOS Software and the research lead for OpenTEAM platform and the farm hack community. He's passionate about sharing open source agricultural tools, software, and data to accelerate innovation and quantify environmental services for regenerative agriculture. Welcome, Dorn.
Whew, that's a lot. And finally, we are pleased to be joined by Colin Naumoff, co-founder of FarmFair.io. FarmFair is a software platform that allows small-scale producers and food hubs to work collaboratively through a shared marketplace and management platform while sharing high-cost infrastructure that already exists in a region.
Right, so let's get started. First up, we have Greg AgStack, co-founder of ourside.net and an open technology advocate with an interest in creating more of everything available in the public domain. Quickly, before you start, Greg, let me remind our live stream audience that you can type your questions in the YouTube comment section chat, and we will respond to them live. Greg, it's such a pleasure to have you here today. What can you tell us about your work at OurSci and how open source technology is enabling this work? Please take it away.
Thanks. Sure. So let me click present there. So I'm Greg AgStack. I'm one of the co-founders of OurSci, and our mission is pretty straightforward. We want to support community-based research, and it comes from the fact that we believe that the future of human knowledge, or at least a much larger portion of it, is going to come from large-scale distributed communities rather than necessarily from industry or academia. Not that those are bad sources, they're great sources, but that a lot of the big difficult problems in the world, which could be addressed by someone sort of sitting in a room or with a small team, have been addressed. And a lot of the problems that we have now from climate change or other sort of complicated global problems really requires a large number of people across a large space to really like level up their understanding, collect data together, understand what that data means, and then create actionable outputs from that data together. So we really want to support that process. And part of supporting that process is creating new and unique tools for those large communities to collaborate effectively. So that's really where we spent a lot of the last 4 years since we've started. So right now, in terms of where we are as a business, we spend a lot of time supporting specific individual communities. So we work a lot with OpenTEAM and Dorn, which is a community of developers and kind of prosumer type farms or farm networks who are interested in better understanding soil health and creating an open ag tech ecosystem. We work with the Bionutrient Food Association, which is a group of farmers, foodies, and activists who believe in connections between soil quality, food quality, and human health. So trying to help them, do original research in connecting those things together and understanding that so they can make better decisions on the ground. And then other communities, CarboFarm among them, interested in soil carbon and other things. So those are some example communities that we work with. And then in working with these communities, we identify what's missing from the world that allows these communities to succeed in asking and answering those hard questions. And so we've developed some tools internally to help us provide those communities and hopefully future communities, because we really feel like this is just the beginning with the capacity to succeed. So one is SurveyStack. SurveyStack is a survey tool, but it's really, rather than built for just getting an answer to a question from an individual, it's built to help support an entire community to ask and answer questions, manage those questions together, understand best practices and all that kind of stuff. So it's a survey tool, but it's really built for communities. SoilStack similarly is a survey tool, but it's built for point-based data collection in the field. And we specifically use it for soil sampling and smart soil sampling. It's one of the only tools out there that allows you to stratify fields. Basically, instead of it being able to make smart sampling decisions on the basis of additional information rather than just sampling in sort of a rote way. The Farmer Coffee Shop is a digital benchmarking service that connects to a service provided by one of our partners, FarmOS. And then we also make our reflectometer, which is a fairly simple device for measuring spectral reflectance of food. We also use it for soils, but basically, if there is a parameter that relates to spectral reflectance, then we can build a model that relates the reflectance values back to that parameter. So that's what the reflectometer does, and we are working with the Bionutrient Food Association to connect lab nutrition data to the reflectance data to try to build a prediction model so that in theory, in the future, in the field, you can use this device to estimate the amount of antioxidants in a carrot or the amount of minerals in an apple. So we do actually have a working model that's out there in beta form. It's pretty rough, but we have gone through that process, and that's pretty exciting. This is just an example of like how we work with an individual community with OpenTEAM. We try to identify a set of design parameters that's going to help support anything we do within that community. So when we started working with OpenTEAM, we created the Research Farm Roadmap kind of subgroup. And really the short of that was we want every farm to be able to be a research farm. Doesn't mean every farmer wants to be a researcher. It doesn't mean they're going to be spending a bunch of time on research, but it means that the same data you're collecting for management decisions or other decisions should also be able to be used to improve not only your own strategic decision making with research, but also the broader communities, while still respecting individual privacy. So that's like we start from that foundational, we all agree this is what we want, and then we work our way down to what are the design parameters by which we can get this thing. So these are kind of the simple top-level design parameters that we try to implement in that work. So that's an example implementation of how we can work with the community, and that's really it. These are our contact information if you're interested in more.
Thanks. Thanks, Greg. That's a lot of interesting stuff you guys are pulling together. I actually do have to ask you, when I was looking at your website, I saw a couple other acronyms of communities you work with, and I wondered if you could just explain who those are. I think GOAT and GOSH, and I'm assuming you're not talking about Michael Jordan when you're saying GOAT, but who are those communities?
So
and
many
how are you
goats.
working with them?
In sumo, it's Hakuho. But yeah, so sure, the GOAT community is the Gathering for Open Ag Tech, which is a community of developers, actually, primarily, and kind of prosumers or kind of super users who are interested in building an open source ag tech ecosystem. So all of the pieces of software or pieces of tooling that would be involved in agriculture, how can we get that to be fully open source and accessible? And that's really the goal. And that we did our first conference 3 years ago now. We're hopefully going to do another one this year. I think a lot of the concepts and connections and people from that is what kind of initiated OpenTEAM to a certain extent. That's that idea. Dorn's been working for a long time, but I think it was an important piece. So it helps support other ventures, but it's really the core. And GOSH is similar, but in the open science hardware space. And that was founded in 2017. And we're now going to have a global gathering this year. We've got 400 or 500 participants. It's really quite a broad community. What's great about both of these is they're non-organizations, right? We didn't get together and say, how can we build a company or how can we build an organization? We got together and said, we all believe, absent our organizational hats, in this thing together, right? This very clear thing. How do we do it? And we just started working towards it. And I think that kind of distributed and focused capacity, which we have today, we didn't have 20 years ago with the internet and tools for collaboration and everything. It really means that individuals working together can accomplish a great deal. And I think those communities represent that.
Yeah, great. It's a great example of these communities. Thank you. So let's shift now to, you've mentioned several times during your presentation, OpenTEAM. Well, we're very lucky to get to hear from Dr. Dorn Cox from OpenTEAM. Dorn is Research Director at Wolf's Neck Center for Agriculture and the Environment, founder of the FarmOS software platform and the Farm Hack community, and project lead for the Open Technology Ecosystem for Agricultural Management, known as OpenTEAM. And you're also a farmer, an organic farmer. So welcome, Dorn. Thank you so much for joining us today. Can you tell us more about FarmOS and OpenTEAM, and how do you see these technologies facilitating change in food production and food systems? Hey, Dorn, you might need to start again. I think your mic is muted.
You are correct. Sorry about that. Can you see me now? Are we all good? Courtney, can you hear me now?
Excellent. Thank you.
Terrific. Sorry about that. I was jumping ahead. But thanks so much, and I'm really pleased to be here about this and have this conversation. One of the key things I think that's important to recognize is that we're starting to ask so much more from agriculture beyond providing food, fiber, and energy, which of course we still need, but we're starting to ask in terms of agriculture for mitigating climate change, for providing biodiversity, recreation, habitat, wildfire suppression, and many other services. And a lot of those services are mixing some of the private enterprise with public goods. And then a lot of those are a little less tangible. So it really requires a different kind of measurement to recognize the value that we're trying to provide incentives for. And that part of agriculture is what we've always had as part of agriculture, but perhaps not elevated. It's the system science, the public science of agriculture. And OpenTEAM was really formed in order to help make those invisible parts of agriculture visible and valuable. And so I'll just quickly go through the acronym, because I think it does a fairly good job of explaining what we're about and how FarmOS, which by the way, I'm a co-founder, not a founder of that, but OpenTEAM is open because, again, as a system science, a public science, we need solutions that are scalable and trusted. Technology ecosystem, because it's not just the technologies, but how they work together in the communities in order to deliver the kinds of insights that we need. And as Aaron Alt from Purdue University says, interoperability means working together. That's both technology, but also people. And then ultimately, it's about agricultural management, because none of these insights, regardless of how good they are any good if they aren't translated into action, into producers' hands, into the food system in a way that actually can be actionable. And that's really important, because building solutions that only work for a subset of, say, Midwestern row crop production doesn't get us to where we want to go. I'll just also mention that I'm research director at Wolfsneck Center for Agriculture and the Environment in Freeport, Maine, and they serve as the convener for the OpenTEAM project, which is now more than 45 organizations representing, again, an ecosystem of the food system: farms and ranch networks, food companies, government agencies, technology providers, environmental marketplaces, research universities, and many others. And we continue to grow. But most important is that we have representation, broad representation, in this broader definition of agriculture and our shared interest in making things making a system that works, that delivers both a stable climate and biodiversity, but also delivers in productive, profitable enterprises. So one of the framings we think about in technology and agriculture is moving from the mindset in terms of from precision to decision, and that's really having actionable insights and democratizing access, providing, as Greg talked about, every farm having access to the best possible information, that will improve land stewardship and maximizing of those public benefits of soil health and climate mitigation and other values, and being able to quantify that. And we're starting from an amazing place in terms of the tech landscape to pull from. So in OpenTEAM, we were able to say, everybody come and put your tools out on the, unpack your tool shed, put them out on the lawn, let's see what we got. And it's an incredible array of AI and remote sensing and spectral analysis and communications platforms and environmental models and so forth, but they have not been designed coherently together. They're distributed across corporate structures and academic institutions and inside government agencies. And yet, in order to draw the next insights, we need to connect them together. And so that's really what the community is about, is being able to translate from in-field insights. The picture on the right here is actually one of our size soil sensors in the field. But using our best available observation tools, including our eyes, to capture insights and observations, linking that with remote sensing, agroecosystem models to analyze, and then ultimately translate that into decision that's delivered in an appropriate format, regardless of the production scale or system. And so that's really what OpenTEAM is doing, and we also represent, hub networks of different scales and production systems, not only in the US, but internationally, to help to develop these tools. But a key observation is that the most useful unit for data is the very precise information that's useful at the farmer, rancher, land steward level, and that all the rest of the value comes from that, and having a really high quality and supporting the data collection and analysis at the farm level enables us to improve our research and development, enables us to create new marketplaces for premium products and for certifications, and to provide better feedback and more efficient government incentive programs, and also to create new digital assets based on environmental improvement or other goods that require measurement. That other than the calories that we eat, the rest of that is really a data-driven market. And so the environmental service markets are one example of where we're building the enabling infrastructure to make that all work. But I want to make clear that as we're talking about open software that the other piece and public data in terms of the way science works and the way the world works and sharing that. One of the key building blocks that we're focused on is improving trust and actually also enforcing and creating tools that enable data sovereignty at the individual level in order to be able to share more effectively. And so we have this concept that we should be able to enter data once and use it many times from the producer's perspective and control those transactions to have full transparency, which actually adds value to everybody else who's looking at that data. It's one of those, that digital scarcity, being able to introduce scarcity in this global copy machine of the internet is really important, to have trust in what that observation was and where it came from and what and how that's being controlled. So that's really important. So we've been developing what we call an ag data wallet, where producers are able to control copies of all their data. And rather than having large centralized organizations where you have to ask for it back or you trust them to control it, in fact, they ask you for it. And that sets up a whole different paradigm. So we can come back to that later. But in general, we're building a tech stack together with a number of tools now that's essentially an open knowledge tech stack. It provides the foundation for what I think is important for a digital equity toolkit. And that's the open libraries that we're all sharing. We're working with USDA to help make more of their data publicly available. The Linux Foundation and AgStack and their project to make weather and soils and plant and other information freely available. Onboarding tools to get data into this system, folks like RSI and Greg's tools, but also Light Farm for organic certification, PastureMap for rangeland management, FarmOS as a farm operating system and data structure for creating interoperability across all those different platforms, but also record keeping and management. Digital Green for consent management to help create traceability in our tools, and then some other communications platforms to enable peer-to-peer communication and transactions on the digital asset side with folks like Regen Network. And all of this enables us to do some really exciting things in peer-to-peer knowledge exchange. I won't go into this, but this is just a quick screenshot of that enables farms to compare how their soils or how their yields or unable to share pricing information and control who they see their data with, what context, and so forth. So really exciting things that allow for much more dynamic exchanges of knowledge, but also new enterprises and refinements of those. So in short, thanks for giving me the time to go through maybe a little bit long presentation here, but we have millions of years of genetic information that we share and is stored in our seeds, breeds, and technology. We have and we've got this amazing knowledge sharing tool that's only a few thousand days old to transform ourselves into a beneficial organism and build a deep topsoil future. So thanks so much. Oh, Matthew, I think you're on mute.
We are all about talking on mute these days, aren't we? So what I said was wow, 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 wow. That was fantastic. I don't know where to start, but I think perhaps one of the things that's most compelling there was that slide that you showed with farmers able to exchange information, data with each other at the level that they feel like it, right? That really drilling into this data sovereignty thing. Is this possible on corporate platforms? How does what you're doing differ from if I'm a farmer and I've got my data on my John Deere tractor or whatever? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, I think the difference is that what we're building is designed from the producer level up to enable create an architecture to allow for both sovereignty and sharing. And that means that the technology aligns with the social norms as well as the legal structures so that we can actually, because one of the big challenges we have in lining, and everybody's who's, who signs those consent agreements to use an app knows that you don't really read it, right? And it's got a
Right.
bunch of things. And it's basically a coercive approach, whereas we can flip that around where rather than saying we're going to enter all your data into our platform, what we can switch around is that corporate platform is essentially a service, and then they're asking for our data, and we say, what are you going to use it for? And then we sign a consent. So it allows for a different model of transaction that I think is really important and sets up it as a transaction rather than a checkbox
Right.
and consent agreement. And we came to this because we were trying to get interoperability for sharing across all these different platforms within our ecosystem and recognizing that we really need to change how we create the architecture if we're going to actually have nuance and sort of decommodify that process of data transactions. So it is very different. I think we can work with the existing. In fact, we have some of the large corporate members that are participating, but they only have a portion of the data they're collecting on machine data or so forth is only a portion. So
Right.
I think there's an opportunity to pull that in to a data wallet and then be able to exchange it from that point, because they all say that's your data, we protect it, you can get at it. It's then a matter of getting it into a form that's actually portable.
Uh-huh. That's wow, terrific. Well, I can't wait to circle back with you for more details in our roundtable. But right now, let's turn to our final guest today, Colin Naumoff. Colin is the executive director of FarmFair.io and those who are co-founder. For those who are unfamiliar with FarmFair.io, it's a company that develops software and platforms for food hubs. Colin, thank you so much for being here. Before you start, on your website, it says that FarmFair.io is creating economies of collaboration to compete with economies of scale. Can you just tell us quickly about what that means and define that, or if it's in your presentation, and then just jump straight in. But I thought maybe we could just talk about that phrase for a second.
Sure, absolutely. And I'd also just like to say I'm a champion pig shower, so don't miss that beat either. But
Wilbur.
That's right. But yeah, certainly economies of collaboration is, kind of the beating heart of our platform. And generally the premise there is to say, we work on the market side of things and dealing with kind of food distribution companies and the benefits that they have from economies of scale are never anything that we in regional food systems can replicate. So we needed a new way to generate efficiencies that are relevant to the markets, and that we're doing that through economies of collaboration. And in the presentation, I'll describe kind of where those economies of collaboration come from.
Great. Please take it away.
Wow. Let me go into presentation mode here. So, I think what's so interesting about this great story you're hearing is that we heard from both Greg and Dorn really around the importance of data collecting and sharing at the farm level. And I think what you'll hear from me is a very, very similar story regarding data, except at the market level. And just, can I get a verbal, you guys can see the presentation now?
Looks great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think we've been talking about access of data, and when we think about at the market level, so FarmFair really has been designed to sell into institutional markets. So you can think about those institutions as hospital systems, larger food processors like the General Mills or the Stonyfields of the world, in addition to colleges and universities. And when we start to support farmers who are, anywhere between, that 20 and 80 acre growing specialty crops, one thing that becomes very obvious is that they are lacking really market information, meaning what is being demanded specific to their region and what are their fellow farmers growing. And certainly in our regional food system, that access to that market side information is really a missing link to driving efficiencies. When we ask the farmers that we work with, whether it's in Washington, whether it's in Ohio, and we say, how do you decide what to grow every year in your production planning processes? We hear everything from, I rely on my gut, to a dartboard, to, I guess. And certainly when we think about the viability of farmers and especially those farms in the middle, we know that's no way to run a business if you're just guessing every year. So part of kind of the methodology of Farm Fair is to provide access to that market data. And how we do that is enabling food hubs to work as a network. So I'm just going to start and to make sure we all are on the same page regarding food hubs. So food hubs are essentially just small food warehouses that work with anywhere between 20 and 50 farmers to aggregate their supply and sell them into one market. And generally food hubs, break even at 1.2 million, but when they work together strategically, they can see their sales grow significantly in just the first year. And I really related to something Dorn said around kind of aligning, data sovereignty and sharing at the same time. And you can think about that's what it means to work as a network when you're basically asking food hubs to now say, I'm not going to only make business decisions in the context of my own operation, but I'm going to now ask ourselves to think about ourselves as an organism. How, if I make this decision, will impact the rest of our network? And so again, you can think about the network as that modern spin on a historic, on the farm cooperative. And we call this networked approach a way to achieve economies of collaboration. Not only do we enhance and enable collaboration in the kind of the data and the inventory space, but certainly we also make a strong effort on that on kind of hard assets like shared salespeople and logistic freight with additional capacity. So those are two aspects of the of networking we also support that we can get into later if there's interest. One thing that we have discovered over our last 5 years of operation is the need for data standards. And I'm happy to be transparent that I am not a technologist by training, and I come from the food system lens. And if you would have asked me 5 years ago that I would have spent all of 2021 talking about data standards, I certainly would not have predicted that. But one thing that as we have continued to generate region-specific demand and supply data, the analysis has become challenging because of lack of data standards. And what does that mean? These are just examples here. How do we call the product? What's our pack size and what's our weight? So in regional food systems, generally, whether you're at the farm level or the food hub level, you have full autonomy to choose your pack size. And so this creates kind of a mishmash of market sizes available and creates not only confusion to the customer when they're trying to do, comparisons, but it also creates, again, confusion on the synthesis side. Commodity markets also don't have regulatory mandated pack sizes, but over the years, the markets have just kind of aligned to agree on certain standards, and that's where we're hoping to move. The other aspect of this is, kind of what I describe as value-driven attributes. And so when we go and we're selling again to those institutional customers, I'm again more than happy to report right now, regional food system, crops that are grown again with kind of climate sensitivity in mind, labor fairness in mind, we aren't price competitive with commodity markets. And where we are competitive always is the value that we bring. However, currently it's difficult to report on that values-based opportunity for those institutional customers. So as an industry, we also need to move towards, on every product, we need to define what attributes related to that, whether it's an ownership attribute, whether it's a practices ownership, and et cetera. We need to be able to collect that data and then share that out with those customers, because again, that's part of the value, right, we are bringing. We like to say local food or regional food isn't more expensive, it's more valuable, but we need to be able to report on that. So defining what those standards are, that's something that we're in process of working with the USDA on and IC Foods to help develop in regional food systems. What's the recommended approach here? The other thing we hope this leads to is very similar to what Dorn was talking about regarding the ag wallet. This absolute need for interoperability. So right now, Farm Fair's central, again, the beating heart of Farm Fair is the ability to enable food hubs to share data specific to their inventory to enable them to sell to customers, large volume customers, in addition to production plans strategically together. In order to build that, we used an open source tool that is an ERP, which services as that inventory management platform. Is the ERP kind of where we really wanted to be? No, but it was a means to an end. And so when we have been talking to food hubs across the country, the question always is, well, do I have to leave my ERP in order to do this networking, which the industry knows is the next generation? Also, can you integrate with my accounting? Can you integrate with my logistics dispatching? And the list goes on and on. Again, very similar to what you heard Greg and Dorn talk about at the farm level, but now we're talking at the market level. Now, when we're talking to kind of the MailChimps of the world, or the MailChimps tell me about the plight of regional family farmers, of course not. So we're wondering, at the Farm Fair spaces, we are currently integrating with local food marketplace, but we need to have this ability so that food hubs aren't setting alarms to remind themselves when to move data from one software to another. Currently, on average, a food hub uses somewhere between 6 and 10 softwares to manage their business. And by the way, that's an actual example. So what we've been talking about is, again, is there a need for a public food blockchain, which is, again, very similar to the vision that Dorn painted, that the Farm Fair, for example, becomes an application that grabs data from this central database that both has encrypted data, so secure data, and some, private data that you don't share. And that is the vision that we really see that is essential for regional food systems to move forward, so that they both have that data to make informed and important production planning and demand side decisions, but simultaneously have the ability to retain ownership of their data and control which aspects of the data attributes they want to remain private. And I think the last thing that I want to say is that the need for tech appropriate application to regional food systems and the translation of what that means to both food hubs and farmers is critical. Again, coming from the food system space and understanding the chaos it takes to run, a $2.5 million food hub, we don't have time as food hub operators to dive into the depths of which tech is going to transform our industry. And so I think it is a responsibility of all of us who play in this space to be able to translate that and identify, again, the tech appropriate, not what's just the new and hottest tech, but where the applicability truly is. And I'm so happy to be on this call with folks who get it. And every time I join a No Food, I always learn something. So thanks so much for the opportunity to be here.
Oh, great. You packed a lot in there, speaking of packing. Thank you, Colin. That was great. Particularly interested in kind of how you're able to start interoperating all these different technologies for regional applications. And I mean, that sounds clearly like a big challenge. And you and all of our guests today, there's been kind of a thread going through everything, and one of them is interoperability, and the other one is the need for kind of this community engagement, and also a lot of it is based on open source technology. And I just wonder if you could talk a little more about why is the open source piece of this, why do you think that is so important? And then I'll actually flip that same question to our other guests as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally at a macro level, we've seen the truly detrimental effects of kind of privatization of many systems, but certainly including the data space. And I think one thing we know is that farmers and food hubs absolutely need access to both their data and use it how they want to use it. But in addition to, we need to be able to replicate technology in a way that we're not paying it for every time. The margins that food hubs and farmers work with is so dismal. So to ask them to, hey, could you invest in this next technology or whatever that might look like for them is an insane premise and we'll never get to a new future. And that's kind of where I see the need for open source, is to say, we are at a crossroads here as, again, a world that unless we figure out how to provide more information to farmers, to those selling the farms grown with regenerative practices, like, we're going to be in a world of hurt because we're just going to keep completing the same mistakes over and over. And so unless we're able to, again, like, use that open source technology in a way that allows us to replicate faster and accelerate to a new future, again, we're going to be in a world of hurt. So that's kind of where I see that need and the deep reliance on an open source future.
Great, thanks, Colin. And let's invite our whole group back on screen here. So Dorn, what do you think about the need for the open source aspect of technology?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely critical because of the complexity of the food system and the numbers of players in it. If any large player could perhaps technically build it, but then it wouldn't necessarily be trusted. And so I like to think about, the open source as, again, relating to agriculture as a shared human endeavor, as part of our product, of sort of representation of what we're building together. And I kind of think of it like a trunk. Or a tree, rather, where we have sort of the roots of agriculture at the base, and we're building this sort of technology infrastructure as the trunk and branches. And then the leaves and branches and fruit are where you compete. If you think about a tree, the branches are actually in competition with one another in some fashion. And that's important, but it's a small part. It's a really important part, but it's a small part of what's actually happening. So I think what we're recognizing across healthcare and agriculture and other industries, and this is where, Linux Foundation, to build things like, to ask big questions, we need to be able to do big things together. And that's where the internet was formed. The internet is based on open source tools and technologies, but even filmmaking and automotive industry and everything else is moving in this direction, where we have to build really big, complex infrastructure that has to work, right? And then compete and innovate on the edge. In fact, we need that. We want to build, but in fact, we can't innovate if we don't have the base that works. You're just going to spend the same money again and again, and it's not efficient. And so we're seeing this even in Silicon Valley right now. There's like, let's have a common code base that we can work from, now build a company on top of that.
Yeah. I just want to say something really quick, because I think it should not be missed, is that in order to get to this future, this like very beautiful future that Dorn paints, is that finance has to change, right? So we cannot like just fund private companies that build private technologies. And that's why you hear from all of us, who's funding us? The government. Right? Because the government sees a long-term return for society at large versus a private return. And I think we need to like really be cognizant about financing structures too.
Well, and I should say the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research is requiring private and public funding match. And so that's a really important point, is trying to create that pre-competitive space. And they use that language very appropriately, which is the other way to say that is collaborative space.
Actually, at the first IC Foods conference that we had, we were joined by who was then the chief science officer for Mars Foods, Harold Schmitz, and his premise, he was the keynote speaker. His premise was, there is no such thing as pre-competitive space. It's all competitive, but if you're not part of that space, that collaborative space, you're going to miss out. So in that sense, it behooves players to be part of this, what would otherwise be called a pre-competitive space. But in fact, you are more competitive by being there. So
right. So competitive ecosystems as opposed to competitive individuals is another way to think about it. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And I think that's actually really important. I think, one other thing that is worth just sort of shouting out is that, open source does not mean open data. And I think there's still a fair amount of the community out there that doesn't totally realize this, that open source means that the code that was used to build the software is open, and people can and you change that and become part of the community and add to that. And that makes the code more transparent. You don't know when you're on a corporate platform how much of your data they're taking, what goes where. And as you say, when you sign a end user licensing agreement that's 5 pages long, it's a little bit like religion. You don't really know what you're signing up for, and you just kind of do it.
Well, I think that's where these things scale, and I think on the funding side, you're absolutely right. I think VC funding, whether it's open source or not, can drive poor decisions and experiences ultimately. So there's a downside there. I think a better long-term strategy is making open source something that consumers demand, and that's like a big leap. But let me throw it out there, right? Like the open source is a complicated concept that relates back to people's ideas and perspectives about how the world should work and how that world delivers value back to them and how they see themselves interacting with others and the importance of public good and all that kind of stuff. It's complicated, and most people don't get it, and that's why no one cares about it. But like climate change is kind of complicated too, right? Like organic is kind of complicated too. And yet we've taken those ideas and we package them up in a way where someone can go, I want that. Like, I don't necessarily know all the details, and there's a downside of that to people not knowing all the details, right? We don't want to like trick people or something like that. But like, I do think that if the public demanded that their technology be open, even if they're not the ones looking at it, they recognize that the 1% of people who are looking at it are making it better for the 99% of people who are using it. They will understand the value of that. And I think the stuff happening with Facebook and people demanding, really fundamentally understanding they're building a different relationship between them and their data and them and their software and the importance of the virtual space. They will, I think, get there. And when that demand happens, none of the rest of this matters because now it's all market driven anyway.
I do think that there are business models to be made around data sovereignty and around understanding what our own personal data is worth, whether it's us as individuals or whether it's us as farmers or us as food hubs, collaborative groups. In some ways, I absolutely agree with that. So, but the $1 billion question is how do we take these technologies forward that we say are for democratizing the food system, and actually get them in the hands of people so that we are actually democratizing the system and not just building tools for democratizing the food system. Anybody want to how to make that happen? Because that seems like the kind of the bottlenecking, right? To uptake.
Yeah, just toss them an easy one, Matthew.
Yeah, well, no, this is, I think, very topical, I think, for all the speakers here. And right. I think you put a lot of effort into, and you see different aspects that we're tackling. And I think part of this sort of translating theory to practice means tackling all the complexity of the food system from the biological and social and economic. And they each actually have some common infrastructure, I think. And I think some of that comes from the creation of this sort of the decommodification process that we're talking about, is starting to create identities that attach all of those unique and intrinsic values that Cullen talked about and introduce that into our transactions. So that means that the value that the land is bringing, the value that the land stewards are bringing, that has nothing to do with the calories that are sending, even this kind of things that Greg is talking about with nutrient density, is like all those things that decommodify that transaction, that add additional value, but that can now be quantified that were otherwise invisible. I mean, that's what the beauty of commodification is, that this bushel of wheat is fungible with that bushel of wheat. You put them all together, and then you get a price, and now you can trade that globally. But what we're asking for is all the rest of those things, because it's important. If we don't have information, we can't actually value it. We can't demand it, and that's a long way of saying that value then is recognized back at the individual level. The incentive for collecting that information is that it has value and that you are able to recognize it and include it in your transaction to support your individual enterprise, whether it's for the public good that you're selling your food into the food system, or the private good in that sense, or the public good in terms of you're contributing to climate change or social benefits for all the the employment that you're providing for your local community, or creating habitat or cleaning water in your watershed. Like, all those things otherwise are intangible. So from my perspective, that's part of is creating the tools that make those invisible, those attributes that Cullen talked about so well, visible and valuable, and that then you can start to govern, right? You can have transactions.
So it sounds like you're moving towards something along the lines of true cost accounting, where we take into consideration what would otherwise be called externalities, right? I mean, oftentimes production, agriculture, or processing push things off externally and don't consider the cost of polluting the stream or the wetlands or whatever it is, and that's something for other people to deal with. But right now, I'm concerned with my farm or whatever it is, and I don't want to worry about that. So, and if that means I need to hire cheaper labor, or I need to do, X, Y, or Z, so I guess there's a rub, right? Because when you're not doing true cost accounting, when you are growing commodities, you don't have an incentive to switch to doing things that take into consideration the value of all these other things that you're talking about. So how do we fix that? How do we transition those folks? Colin, you got your hand up. Please take it.
Yeah. So one thing that I think is getting in the details, getting in the weeds, right? Greg mentioned this, related exactly to what you're saying, Matthew, is what is the incentive for commodity growers to switch to specialty crops that's using true cost accounting? Well, one reason that one reason that big ag and all these row crop, industries still exist is crop insurance. Crop insurance is the hill that big ag will die on. And right now, we have one type of crop insurance policy that supports specialty crop growers. And we have a whole plethora of other policies that supports any type of commodity grower, very attuned to what geography you're in and what crop you're in. And why this matters is that as a commodity grower, frankly, like, I can plant this, but if it doesn't yield everything I need, I can count on the US government to pay me out the remaining. So there's just really no incentive for them to switch. And well, why can't we provide that same type of crop insurance policies to specialty crop growers? Shockingly, data. We don't have the data at the US government level. It's also important to know crop insurance is actually mainly offered by the Risk Management Agency of the USDA. And right now, RMA nor the underwriters have enough data to write policies for specialty crop producers. And that's another reason this open source technology that Greg and Dorn and I are all discussing is really critical to help the US government get better data for them to help to make better decisions too.
Yeah, I'll add something sort of a different angle to this too. I grew up like on a conventional farm, started small, and now it's big. So I interact with organic farmers, regenerative farmers, and then I go home and I hear the whole spiel from my dad. And I think one of the things that I'm constantly aware of in this space is that we're always talking about how to incentivize people. Yeah. And when you're the people being incentivized, you're like, what are you doing? You're trying to like, am I a pawn on your chessboard? You know what I mean? There's a little bit of pushback, and I understand both sides, but I would offer that I think we could have as much, if not more, impact at scale by simply providing transparency and capacity for individuals to better understand what practices work, when, where, and how with sufficient context. I think actually pretty much everyone wants to do the best job that they can do, regardless of external incentive. And not everyone, but a lot. And sometimes it's just a question of, I'm not exactly sure how to make an adjustment to make this work that's realistic. And if someone 100 miles away has figured it out and I don't know them and I can't understand what they've done and all I did was get 2 minutes, at a coffee table with them, that's not going to be sufficient for me to make a practice change. But being able to see the detail of their data, being able to have a longer conversation, being able to understand how it's contextualized on my farm, I probably will without any external incentive because I know it's better. So I would say incentivizing is important, but just transparency of information will cause farmers to do better because they want to.
I would add that I think there are also some new social structures and positions that need to be created to facilitate this new economy. And I think we have sort of the idea, we have Colin talked about the history of agricultural cooperatives. I think there's an important model to follow there on the financial side of things like farm credit, is creating farmer data unions. And then with that, the kind of folks who are facilitators and creating value that's, again, we're asking for this additional value. There's a role in curating and gathering that's going to be beyond the scope of most of the land stewards, often who are not digital novices or not digitally native, and it's not appropriate, I think, to think that this one individual or enterprise is going to be able to tackle all of these things and I think we have to look at it as that this is, again, a community effort. We need to build a marketplace around it, just like we have with the rest of the food system. And so I think that's some of the sort of the evolution in the marketplace is creation of new professional roles within this within the marketplace.
And I just want to offer something. Yeah, final there is around, Matthew, you asked this question, I'm going to just summarize as like traction, right? How do we get folks to be using these technologies? And then I heard both Greg and Dorn really, and I wrote something down, and then I heard you guys both kind of, get to this point around trust. So I think so much of this is around, who do I trust who can help me navigate this? And it's central to kind of open source. It's central to this decentralized vision that we all know is around how do we trust, but it's also like, Dorn, like people can call, like they trust you. They know that you'll get the straight answer. And the same thing kind of in our space. And I think part of, it's not that fast technology answer we want, but it's true. Like in order to change the future, change that future of technological application, we all, being those community members and being that trusted source is a really key part of this puzzle.
I have two things that are very different that I want to ask you. And one of them is teeing off of the conversation we've been having about markets. And the other one is about Dorn's comment about new positions. And let me start with the position one. So you're talking about we're changing how we do business. So where are the areas where we really need to build human capacity to make this work? So how do we think about redesigning how we train our workforce? Let's just start with that one.
I'll offer, I think it's what Colin just said, which is, or Dorn calls it digital intermediaries, but I think those digital intermediaries are going to be really important. People you trust, you can hand a pile of data in a consistent format, who then can go provide value in a way that you feel is appropriate, whether that be a digital benchmarking system to help you better understand your operation, or application to an ecosystem service market if that's your preference. But I think there's a need for people like that.
So it's almost like a new service layer within the marketplace.
Yeah, if you imagine how we work with our accountants to maintain QuickBooks and to get value out of an analysis of our financial system, we have the opportunity to do that with essentially the landscape that we're managing and all the data associated with it. Because the financial output is like a tiny fraction of the variables that we're actually capturing that produce that output, right? That's just the farm gate transactions. But what we're really talking about is creating new markets, new asset types from that, and there's value in creating that, but it takes special skills. And I guess I use that example also of that sort of trusted sort of fiduciary, that financial advisor or accountant, because they have an obligation to work on your behalf. And so I think that fiduciary role of data management is a really important sort of model to perhaps reference. But it requires a new skill set. It requires training on new platforms. It's part of what we're seeing is like we can create these powerful new tools. Now we need a new sort of workforce to be able to implement them in a trusted way.
Wow, what a great conversation. Well, unfortunately, I think we are just about out of time. So if our virtual audience could join me in thanking Greg and Dorn and Colin for sharing their fascinating work and wisdom with us today. We look forward to future conversations and collaborations.
Thank you, everybody. And before we close, we also want to invite everyone to join us again next month when we're exploring new developments in food system AI. We'll be joined by Professor D.K. Panda from The Ohio State University, Professor Beth Paley from Indiana University, and Dr. Patrick Huber from UC Davis. And we'll be talking about NSF's newly launched Icicle AI Institute for Cyber Infrastructure, talking about learning at the edge, broadening participation in computing, smart food sheds, and a lot more.
Yeah, great. That's really, really exciting. This is a new $20 million institute across 9 universities, plus IC Foods, and 4 supercomputer facilities. And the food system is one of the driving first use cases. And so is digital agriculture, by the way. So we are very much looking forward to that show. It's going to be exciting.
Alrighty. Well, thank you, everybody. And we'll look forward to seeing you next month. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thanks, Al.
Bye.
Thank
you all.
you.